Today on the PIO Podcast, I'd like to welcome Gaurav Gupta. He's the head of R&D at Kotter. Gaurav, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate you being on. You have got a lot of experience in AI, and we're going to talk about a lot of that. But I'd like to know a little bit about your background and how you got to be where you're at right now.
Sure. I'm often talk about myself as a recovering engineer. I studied aerospace engineering, and then did some work with organizations primarily around process improvement. What sort of came out of that was great in the moment improvement, but very hard to drive organizational change that actually led to sustainable change. And so that realization led me to the work that I'm doing now, which is with the firm Kotter, primarily around change and transformation. I head up our research team, so I work very closely with Dr. John Kotter, who what led him to this work was really trying to answer the question of what makes an organization perform better than another one. And that led to the realization that generally the difference is often in moments of transformation and transition, and the organizations that lead transformation effectively are the ones that are most successful. And then that led to the research that we do now, which is really around how to most effectively lead through moments of change and transition.
And let me tell you, change in AI, it's a daily thing. There's always a new update that comes out. I have read a lot. I know nothing about how to do any of this stuff. I am not a programmer. Originally, when I was in college, I remember I was starting out as a systems analyst, and then I was like, oh my God, there's no way. It's not going to happen. Nowadays, it's a lot easier with AI. So let's talk about generative AI and content creation. A lot of the PIOs that are out here, we spend a lot of time drafting press releases and media posts. In your experience, what are the most immediate and valuable applications generative AI can help boost, especially the federal PIO's productivity? Because I think the Fed lacks a lot.
So I think that's probably the place where actually generative AI is having the biggest impact right now, or can have the biggest impact right now in terms of what tools are available, right? Because when it comes to things like understanding who your stakeholders are, ensuring that the information that you're communicating, you've sort of thought through it in terms of what do people need to know, what actions do I want them to take from this, what behaviors do I ideally want to change based on the information that I'm communicating. If you feed into AI enough context and ask for some output around those stakeholders and what they might be thinking about or what they might need, you get some pretty decent answers. Because at the end of the day, I'm not an expert in the wiring of AI either, but what I do know is essentially what it's doing is utilizing the sum total of our knowledge on some of this stuff before to make predictions of what's going to be the right answer, right? And so what it's really enabling you to do is tap into all of the knowledge that sits out there around how to communicate on certain things. And so I use it for myself. And when I use it for myself, I use it in two ways, either to actually create some content to begin with by giving it some of the context. I think it's important that the context is clear in terms of who you're trying to reach. And then those three things, right? What do you want them to know? What actions do you want them to take? What behavior are you trying to change? So giving it that context and then it creates some content is great. The other way that I think it's incredibly helpful is when you already have some messaging, utilizing it to say, look, what's the key takeaway from this, right? If somebody were to get this message, what would they take away? And that for me, when I use it, often flags, oh, okay, you know what? That's not actually what I meant. Maybe I need to reword my message a little bit.
Okay. So, and that's, and you bring up a good point about like information overload, and there's a phrase AI triage. Federal agencies deal with a lot of volume of data, and they have to deal with public inquiries, legislation. How can AI powered tools like, I think the natural language processing or advanced search help a PIO quickly analyze, summarize, and prioritize critical information?
Yeah, I think so. There's value there, and there's also a caution, right? And I think the value is AI again is pretty good if you give it a bunch of information and say, hey, pull out the 4 or 5 key things from this. I think AI is pretty good at doing that. The caution, though, is again because it's not actually thinking, right? It's really predicting based on what's in its training database. So it's good at summarizing things like saying, look, if there's 5 things that are the same and I group them together, and they're very similar, sort of the language in them is very similar, it can do that well. So it can take a bunch of data and it can sort of compress it back down for you, a bunch of information, compress it down for you. What it can't do is look for, or can't do as effectively, is look for patterns and themes. And that's where the human sort of thinking comes into it, right? And so I think using it to help summarize information and sort of compress information, it's great. For using it to synthesize, I would be cautious about, because at least in my experience so far, the synthesis isn't necessarily where and maybe it'll get there, but at the moment doesn't feel like it's where it needs to be.
So is that, if I'm understanding this correctly, is that where they say sometimes AI hallucinates?
Yeah, partly the hallucination, but not just that, right? Because hallucination is creating stuff that isn't true or isn't there, right? So hallucination is sort of adding things that maybe aren't correct or aren't there. So there's that challenge for sure, but also there's the challenge of, if you give a bunch of information to AI, and I did this morning actually. I was doing something and I fed it responses from, it wasn't even that big, it was like 7 or 8 people, and I fed it the responses and I asked it to summarize for me, and what I got back was a list of 8 things, and where people had used very similar language, it was able to combine those into a category. But where people use different language but talking about the same theme, it's not quite able to do that. And so that's what I mean by synthesis. And so if you're trying to use it to synthesize thematically or look for patterns in the information that you have, that's where it's not quite as robust.
Okay, so then it also depends on the model of AI that you're using, because as the models improve, they get better at doing that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think there is still a limit, I suppose, in that, because it is based on previous knowledge of or previous existence of information. That's where I think the human ability to think through and find patterns and be able to actually synthesize ideas. We're probably still a little bit away from AI being able to do it at that.
Okay. Now I have used AI. I've taken a very large study that was done, and I'll give you an example. It was the shooting that happened down at the school in Texas, involving the where the police department didn't do anything. So I took the federal report, I fed it up to ChatGPT, and I asked it to find the communication failures that happened. What did they identify in there? And it came out and gave me kind of like an executive summary. And I thought that was extremely helpful, because it was able to, because it was such a search field in a sense. But for me to have read that all and identified them all, it would have taken
Yes.
months.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great use case. Again, the only caution I would throw out there is, it depends on what you're using the output for, right? If it's absolutely critical to make sure that the output is complete, and hasn't missed any of the key points, then relying on sort of the AI models right now is probably not going to get you the quality product, because it still does miss some things, right? It still does sort of not always pick up on what those, in this case, the communication failures might have been. Now, it'll probably get you 80% of the way there. So again, it's great for an aid, an assistant. Somebody said the other day to me, AI is like having a team of interns, and I think that's a good way to think about it, right? It's a team of people who can do some very effective initial thinking, initial drafting, but we probably still at this stage need the quality control that then goes on top.
Okay, so let's talk about chatbots, because that is something that's very common, and you can't get anywhere without a chatbot. Whether you're getting service on your cable or whatever, you can't even get past the chatbot right away. Public facing or government organizations, they're a little slower to jump onto that aspect of it. I've seen a few, but not many, and they're not very good. So how do we communicate that to the public? Yes, they're there, we're working on it, they're getting better, but in order to be compliant with information, we've got to be careful about when it does make mistakes.
Yes. Yeah, I think, as much as I get frustrated every time I have to interact with an AI chatbot and find it incredibly, frustrating to not be able to talk to someone, I have to say I think that's actually a use case that is working pretty well, when done right. And when I say when done right, what I mean is when there is an ability to triage a particular issue, to say, hey, this requires interaction with a human. And sometimes that might simply be because you require the empathy and you require the sympathy that somebody gets from talking to a person, because it is an emotional issue, it is a deeply troubling issue, that sort of thing. So when the triage is done well on issues, and when you're able to still access a person to talk to, I actually think it's incredibly effective, because answering questions that are about process or questions that are about policy or questions that are about regulations that already exist. AI is fantastic at that and probably actually better than talking to someone who goes, well, okay, let me look it up. And now I'm looking in a system and I'm trying to find the answer for you. And so I think being able to communicate, well, it's not just communicate. I think first being able to utilize chatbots appropriately in that sense of like, what are the areas where they function really well, and what are the areas where actually a human intervention is still the right thing, and then being able to communicate that message to say, and focusing on the value, right? Not focusing on, because I think sometimes people think about the utilization of chatbots in these sorts of areas primarily as a cost improvement effort. It's oh yeah, it's so that you don't need
Hmm.
as many people, and it's about efficiency and it's about cost. And sure, there is that value, but I think the bigger value is actually the effectiveness, and being able to communicate that and being able to help the public see why the
Hmm.
fact that, hey, there's an AI chatbot that can give you answers in 5 seconds. You don't have to hold on line. You can get an answer in 5 seconds, and you know what? That answer is actually more likely to be accurate for things like, hey, what's the regulation on this? I don't know. I'm
Hmm.
in the middle of constructing a house, and I want to understand what the Department of Buildings regulations are for this particular thing. That's where AI chatbots can be incredibly, incredibly useful. And it's not just efficiency, it's effectiveness. And so I think focusing the message around the effectiveness piece, because that's what I care about as a consumer or as a citizen, right? Yes, I do in the abstract sense, but I don't really care about the cost to the federal government. At least not directly, but directly I care about the service that I get from engaging with that. With
And how many times have you interacted with a human, been given information, and you find out later on the information's not correct because they were looking at something old or they just didn't know the answer?
Yeah. Or you call back and you get a different answer from a different human being, right? That doesn't happen
Yes.
with sort of AI design system.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about combating misinformation and disinformation. As AI has grown, generative AI can create highly convincing deep fakes, whether it's video, audio, mass produced misinformation. What roles do PIOs and agency communications strategies play in really being proactive about getting the public trust and letting them know that we're the verified information?
Yeah. I don't actually have a very good answer to this. I think it's a challenge we're all trying to sort through, right? Because the ability to create very credible looking, very real looking information with AI, and whether that's video or audio or text or images, it's incredible what you can do. And so how you sort of really tackle that and make sure that, you can be seen as a source of real information, and then people can be confident in what you're saying. I don't have a great answer to. I will say I think part of it is, and this is where I think limiting the use of AI is good as well, right? Like we are describing earlier, what it works well with and what it doesn't work well with. You want to make sure you're not putting anything out that it's okay for it to be clearly AI generated. I don't think that's actually a problem, but you're not putting anything out that is, misinformation or miscommunication because you relied on the agent, right? So I think that would
Right.
be one, and that's where the quality check becomes important. And then I think the other is what you still see, the limitation on AI is still, it is not great at really customizing and personalizing for either a communicator's style or the audience needs. And so adding that extra layer so that it's clear that this has got that the human has been involved with this, I think helps as well.
All right, so I got to bring this up so that you brought up a thought and about communicating if it's been AI generated, which is very important on the government side because that goes right to trusting the government when they're doing something. What happens when a government agency uses AI to create an audio file of, like here in this case, a police chief that decided to take and put his voice in Spanish and then have him delivering the message in Spanish, even though he didn't speak Spanish. And it looked extremely good. What does that do to the public's trust when they start to wonder, well, if they're doing that, what else are they doing?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, right? And I think that's why we have to be really careful when using AI. One, there has to be transparency. I think there's a big difference between, a public official doing something like that and saying, hey, the reason and it's clear, whether it's in a caption or whether it's however, right? It's clear that I'm doing this because I want to be able to reach people in a language that I don't speak. That's very different than not having that transparency and either it being perceived as, an attempt to to suggest that you do speak the language when you don't, or it being perceived as, well, is it even the words of the individual, or is this, words from somewhere else? So I think the transparency of use is probably the first answer to it. Is and there's various different ways to do that, right? There's various different ways to create that transparency, but I think that's important, because if people can't tell, or feel like you're hiding when you're using something like AI and when you're not, I think trust erodes very, very quickly then, because then it is impossible then to really have trust in what you're hearing.
Yeah, yeah. Karev, let's talk about internal use of AI policies. What should government put in place for guardrails about using AI and what they're doing? Because I think we're having this issue in college too, where college kids are using AI to write papers. What about for employees internally?
Yeah. Um, rather than maybe policies, because I don't quite know enough to speak to specific policies, I would say there's two principles that I think should govern the design of those policies. The first one is what we just talked about, which is transparency of use. So whether internal or external, when utilizing AI, there should be transparency that that's what's happened. And then the other is, at least at the moment, I think the principle should be AI is an enabler. It is an assistant. It does not replace workflows, because we don't yet, I think, have the quality control that allows us to replace workflows. It can only enhance the workflows that people already have.
So let's talk about data privacy in government with AI. What issues do we have to deal with data privacy?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? Because I don't know what government agencies are already doing around this in terms of things like, if you are using, for example, a chatbot, right? My interactions with a chatbot, where do those go and how are they governed? And because there's data privacy issues from the standpoint of employees within agencies and what they have access to and what they are utilizing through AI, which need to be thought through. But then there's also data privacy issues, because every time I now interact with an agency, those interactions are also conceivably going somewhere. So I do think that has to be thought through relatively carefully. I don't know that there is any clear framework right now around how to deal with that. So as and honestly, I think that's going to be one of the challenges to AI adoption, because if we don't get those privacy policies in place and clarity around what those are, it's going to create hesitation to utilize AI in a broader space. So I think it is a challenge, and I don't know I'm not an expert in data privacy by any means, so I don't know what the answers should be. But it clearly is something that, if not addressed soon, I think will create challenges even for adoption, and then of course all of the other challenges that you would have with it.
Okay. So let's talk about like reskilling the workforce, and this is in across the board. There's so much, that people are always saying, well, we've addressed it once before. We talked about initially the AI chatbot replacing a person, but what are your thoughts on that? What and we've already talked about some of the critical thinking skills that it can't do right now. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a massive sort of need for some upskilling, right? And I think it's on a few different fronts. One is clearly actually how to utilize AI effectively. I think there's a skill set there that I do think, we can't assume that people will be able to sort of figure out how to use AI effectively. I think people need to actually be trained and have to develop some skills to do that. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is, and AI is just one part of this, we are living in an environment that is far more uncertain, far more, sort of change is coming at us much more quickly and from much more different sources, from different directions. And so I think the second part of it is, how do we upskill people to be more adaptable, to be more agile, to be more resilient, to be able to go, okay, look, this is the role I was playing today. And you know what? If that role starts to shift because of all of this new technology and because of other changes, that's okay. And here's how I'm going to upskill myself to move on into that different role and to start playing a different role, right? So I think that the skills around adaptability and agility, I think, is the second bucket that we really need to focus on. And then I think the third one, sort of related to adaptability, is this idea of leadership skills being more broadly required across the employee base, right? So rather than thinking of it as leadership skills are only things that are needed by 5, 10, 20, 30 people in the organization, it's really everybody. Because if we're again, in this environment of greater uncertainty and change, what we need more leadership, right? We need people to be able to identify opportunities. We need people to be able to get others excited about them. and then be able to act on them. And so I think from a skills perspective, it's certainly AI skills, it's skills around change and adaptability, and then it's skills around leadership more broadly that I think are going to be necessary for us to actually be able to take advantage of the opportunities that clearly there's opportunity in all of this, right? It's not just about yes, there's fear and anxiety from AI for sure, but there's also huge opportunities for what we can do with it.
Okay. So in regards to what you're doing in Kotter, what talk to me, give me an example of some of the work that you do with government agencies with AI.
Yeah, so our work really is around the adoption side of this, right? How do you actually get value and benefit from AI tools? So what's happening a lot right now is um, AI is that there's the new fad that everybody wants to do something with. And so lots of places, including government agencies, are starting to roll AI out and say, okay, we want people using AI. And the question that everybody's asking is, what's your AI strategy? Right. And we're trying to answer the question of what's my AI strategy. Um, we think that's the wrong question to be asking. The question shouldn't be what's my AI strategy. The question should be, how does AI enable my existing strategy? How does AI enable the
Mm.
mission of the agency? Right? Because AI is a tool. It's a tool to help us achieve something that we already want to achieve. And so a lot of our work is around how do you connect your overall business strategy, agency strategy, the objectives you're trying to meet, the mission you have, and then go, okay, if I start at that level, where are the gaps currently? Where are the things I want to accelerate? Where are the improvements I want to make? How do I utilize AI to help me make those improvements? Right? That's the way we should be thinking about this rather than what's my AI strategy? Because frankly, that doesn't matter. What matters is how does it help me do the things that the mission that I need to do.
That's an interesting way of looking at it because I think about everything that we do in law enforcement. When I was in law enforcement at an executive level, is that there would be these. Okay, well, what is our communication strategy? AI figures into every strategy you do, so it's really not a strategy. It's just that tool that helps you do something better.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, and if we don't start from the objectives of the agency or the objectives of the organization, then what's going to end up happening is we're going to do a lot of activity on AI. We're going to use it in lots of different ways, but it isn't necessarily going to help us progress against the things we want to progress again. And by the way, we're seeing that right now, right? The level of activity on AI and the amount of sort of use cases and people doing things with it is very high, but it's not translating into better results. It's not yet translating into better performance. And I think that's partly because we haven't connected it to overall objectives. And also, by the way, we're starting to see people actually using it less at work and more in their personal lives. And I think part of that is again because in your personal life, you can clearly understand what you want to use AI for and how it helps you. But in your work life, it's an organization, and so you can't do it by yourself. You need the organization to actually articulate a little bit of the value of AI in enabling its strategy.
Yeah, so that I look at this, and the more and more I'm understanding AI, and this is the great thing about it is we can't look at it as just a single tool. It fits in a lot of different areas of everything that we do, and yeah, so it's really it's like a pencil in an office. It can be used for so many different things and create so many different things, but it's not. It's just a tool.
Absolutely. And, I'll give you another example of historically where this has played out very different, but offshoring as a strategy. There was a time in sort of 90s and early 2000s where every business didn't apply as much to federal, but every corporate business would go, well, what's my offshoring strategy? Again, the wrong question. The question isn't what's my offshoring strategy. The question should be, what's my strategy whether it's a cost play, in which case, okay, what's my strategy to make sure I'm cost competitive? Offshoring, maybe. I'm not making any judgments on whether offshoring is good or bad. Offshoring might be part of your strategy, but you shouldn't have an offshoring strategy. And so what that led to is lots of organizations sort of doing a bit of a jump on the bandwagon and following what other places were doing because they had an offshoring strategy rather than a cost management strategy or a cost optimization strategy. And I think it's a similar thing that's playing out here. It's in many ways, it was also a similar thing that was and is still playing out with digital, right? We go, what's our digital strategy? Again, maybe a useful question to ask yourself after you've asked yourself, how does digitalization enable my overall strategy?
So this goes to a thought I was just thinking of. Employees need to know, they don't always need to know the how, but they do need to know, they want to know the why. And I think sometimes that leadership doesn't always project that message to help them understand why we're going to utilize a new tool like AI. And I think that's kind of like where you're going, where your concept is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the why cannot be because everybody's doing it, right? Of course, no one's going to say that, but that's a little bit of the implication of how we're rolling this out in some places. The why has to be some version of because utilizing AI tools is going to allow us to achieve our mission. And then you got to drill down and say how so, right? How is AI going to help? I mean, the example we used earlier about chatbots, same thing. If your messenger on chatbots is the reason we're using chatbots is just because of an efficiency play, that might be true. It's a much harder message to get people excited about than because it's actually going to make things better and cheaper. And I think in most cases that is true of AI. AI is going to make things better and cheaper, not just cheaper. And we have to be able to articulate that why.
So there takes a little bit of retraining then once as you're implementing this, right? That there's got to be some internal retraining to get people to start to think differently about it, because once they start implementing it, you have to start to drill down into the different aspects of everybody's job in order to implement it properly, right?
Absolutely. And this is why I don't think AI is a technology challenge. It is a change challenge, right? It is a behavior change challenge because to get the value out of AI, people have to behave differently. And it's a little bit different. It's even more so than other technologies, right? When you implement something like an SAP system or some other kind of technology system, like a HR management system, for example, when you implement those, once it's implemented, generally people sort of have to use it, right? There isn't I can't go, well, I'm just not going to use that system and I'm going to do it in a piece of paper over here. I mean, to some extent, yes, and there are areas where that's true, but in general, that's the case. That's not true with many of the AI tools. Many of the AI tools, the value comes from how people use it, and how you use it and how I use it will be completely different because there isn't just one, it's not like, oh, you got to follow these 5 clicks. And when you follow these 5 clicks, you get the output. You're creating, you're interacting with it, you're asking questions of it. And so it really is about behavior change. And it really is, you need an effort, a deliberate effort to get people to understand why, to get people to understand how they might use it, to get people to be excited about using it. So not just, oh, well, boss told me to do it, so I'm going to do it and I'm going to check the box. Oh, wow, I can see how this really makes the work that I do better. And so it is all about the implementation is 80% about change and 20% about the actual technology tool.
So the human element is incredibly necessary in this. It's not we want to get rid of human beings and do and save money with getting rid of the bodies. The reality of it is without the human being utilizing it, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to get better.
Yes. Yes. And that's a bit paradoxical, right? Because everybody thinks about AI as, oh, well, AI is taking the human out. But for AI to actually add the value that we wanted to add, the human needs to be in, and we need to be thinking about how humans interact.
Right, right. All right, so I want to go off on a tangent. I'm thinking about college because colleges are really struggling with the use of AI right now, and part of it is they're like, well, if you use any AI and you get caught, it's a violation. There's kids that are getting suspended or kicked out of classes because of it. And the realities of it, that's kind of the wrong way to look at it, right? Should they be saying, all right, we're going to put guardrails in place so that if you want to use AI, and I'll use this as an example, I write a lot. And one of the things I do with AI is I ask it to give me a comprehensive outline so that when I start to write, I've covered all my bases. And because, as humans, we forget things or we miss things. And the AI helps fill gaps. And I think that's important where colleges seem to like no AI at all.
Yeah. So I think maybe a couple of comments. So one is I do think particularly some of the professors, but also some colleges are starting to think about, okay, how do I put these guardrails in place? Because the answer isn't no AI, right? The reflexive answer is no AI, but I think I've definitely talked to some professors who actually are encouraging students to use AI in certain contexts within their classes. Now that being said, I think the balance you have to strike is there's lots of studies already, and I think the research will continue to grow on this, that from a learning perspective, using AI can be detrimental. And the studies that I've seen around this are, for example, if you ask people to use AI to create a paragraph on on a certain topic and then read that paragraph a couple of times versus write it themselves entirely and then read it a couple of times. The retention on it, the understanding, the comprehension is much higher when you sort of do it on your own, right? So I think we don't fully yet know the impact of using AI on things like learning and memory and comprehension and cognition. And so I do think we need to figure that out because what I imagine will be the right answer is there'll be certain areas where actually using AI to help you produce a better product in college, right? Better whatever research paper, etc., is the right answer because it's a tool which you're going to use in your life anyway. You may as well be using it in, right? It's a bit like calculators, right? When calculators first came out, there was this whole thing of, well, if people use calculators, they'll never learn math
Right.
and they won't learn basic arithmetic. And the reality is it's probably true that if you use calculators to do everything like, 2 plus 2, you never really quite get your brain functioning in a way that gets you to do that effectively. So I think there is guardrails are a good word, guardrails that need to be set up. I just don't know that right now we know enough to set up the right guardrails. And so there's going to be a bit of experimentation. There's going to be a little bit of playing around. There's going to be a lot more research, I'm sure, on the topic of how does the use of AI impact not just the product you're creating in the moment, but your learning and your memory and all of those sorts of things. And we will have to land on some sort of principles around how we use it. Banning it entirely is certainly not going to be the answer.
No, and that's not going to stop anybody from using it. Garv, is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered
That's a good question.
it?
I suppose maybe, and we talked a little bit about this, but I think the question around decision making around where and how to utilize AI, right? And that's important because there are various different ways to start, various different places it can be effective. But if not done in a coordinated sort of strategic way, it'll create more anxiety, create more turbulence in the organization than value. And so that point you brought up of the why has to be clear. We have to understand what we're trying to achieve with the use of AI. We have to make sure people understand that. And as leaders, my sort of encouragement would be to err on the use cases that are about effectiveness and better quality product first, because the efficiency use cases, for obvious reasons, create anxiety, right? People start worrying about job losses, etc. And I'm not suggesting that you shy away from it for that reason, but if you want to create momentum and energy around AI, you probably want to prioritize the use cases that are about effectiveness, not efficiency.
Okay. I like that. I appreciate that. Let's switch this up. Let's go to some rapid fire questions. How about that?
Sounds good.
Phone call, voice memo, or FaceTime. What's your go-to for staying connected?
Phone call. I'm old school.
Stream binging or weekend read. What's your ideal escape?
Weekend read.
Morning ritual, sunrise workout, quiet coffee or tea, or news scroll.
Quiet coffee if I can get it.
What's your I've earned this indulgence after a tough week.
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know. Quiet time, maybe. A little bit of peace.
Okay. If you could adopt an animal, any animal, real or mythical, what would it be?
Mythical. Now that throws a real wrench in that. I'd probably still go with a dog.
Okay. What's one song that always gets you moving, no matter the mood?
Gosh, you got me stumped on that one. Probably recency bias, because I heard it this morning. But the song from the movie Madagascar, the "I Like to Move It."
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. All right. Teleportation or time travel, which power would you pick and why?
I should have. So I'm a physicist by training, and the idea of time travel, I sort of go, I can't get my head around that being possible. Whereas teleportation, I sort of can. So I'd go with teleportation.
Yeah, the paradox of maybe screwing something up for the future or the past is always questionable. If you could master one skill overnight, what would it be?
This is cheating, but I think it's using AI effectively. Honestly,
All right, play it safe or roll the dice.
I roll the dice.
If you had 48 hours, no responsibilities, where would you go?
40. That's a very short time frame, Robert. Maybe a walk in the woods.
Okay. If you could sit down with any historical figure, living or dead, and they shadow them and not just meet them, who would it be?
This is so cliched, but it's absolutely true for me. It'd be Nelson Mandela. I mean, the lessons on leadership from shadowing Mandela would be
outstanding. All right, Garv, final thoughts. What key points would you like listeners to take from today's interview?
Think of AI as a change challenge and think about how to get value from it. Why are we doing it? Where's the value? What are we trying to achieve with it? Staying away from asking the question of what's the AI strategy and focusing on how does AI enable my agency strategy.
As we wrap this up, is there a piece of wisdom or a motto that you live by?
I don't know that I live by it, but I try to live by it. Opportunities are in change, right? And so change is not something to be feared. It is actually something to be embraced. And I think that is also true by the way of uncertainty, right? Opportunities sit in uncertainty. So
Yep, I agree
embrace
with that.
change, embrace uncertainty.
That's a good one. How can people best reach you if they want to connect, follow up, or learn more about what you do with Kotter?
Yeah. So, if you go to Kotter website, you can get my contact information on the website. And LinkedIn is always a great place to connect. I try to make sure our latest research is posted on LinkedIn through my account as well.
And I will add all that in the show notes. Garf, thank you for being on the show.
Super, great chatting. Thank you, Robert. I had a great time.